The diamond bracelet was supposed to be mine. I had seen it 6 months ago in the Cartier window display on Michigan Avenue, right after brunch with Brandon. I paused, admiring the delicate row of glittering stones, and he smiled like a man with a secret. "Maybe for our 20th, he whispered, brushing my hand with his thumb. I had smiled back, believing that after 2 decades together, I still meant something to him. Tonight was our 20th anniversary. I stood in front of my mirror in a navy silk dress that clung to the right curves and commanded quiet attention. Sophisticated, elegant, untouchable. Not the red number Brandon had suggested, the one that made me look softer. He always preferred when I looked a little less in control. I slipped in a pair of diamond studs. My wrist was bare. That bracelet should have been waiting for me in a velvet box at dinner. Instead, it would be waiting on the wrist of another woman. I had found it 3 weeks ago in his desk drawer while looking for a pen, tucked beside a jewelry receipt addressed to our company's assistant, Maya Jennings. The same Maya I'd personally mentored. The same Maya who now smiled too much when Brandon was around. The bracelet was just the final confirmation in a trail of disappointments that stretched back months. What Brandon didn't know, what Maya couldn't possibly imagine, was that I wasn't walking into tonight broken. I was walking in ready. In my clutch was a sleek black USB drive, and inside that, every receipt, every email, every surveillance photo my investigator had collected. 4 affairs, unauthorized company withdrawals, lies wrapped in silk and served with candlelight. Downstairs I heard Brandon calling, "Rachel, car's here." I took a breath, smoothing my dress. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Tonight was our anniversary, a celebration. And I had a gift too. Just not the kind that comes in a Cartier box. The restaurant he chose was our usual spot for special occasions. Elysian, perched 30 floors above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows and linen-covered tables lit by soft candlelight. Brandon had reserved the private dining room, as he always did when he wanted to impress investors or stage romantic gestures that played well for photos. But tonight, the guest list had quietly changed. He didn't know that I'd called the restaurant last week. Didn't know I'd spoken to the manager and arranged for a few last-minute additions to the guest list. A table of our business partners from Zurich, 2 clients who had grown suspicious of Brandon's sudden solo meetings, and a journalist from the Herald who'd profiled our company last quarter. Witnesses. All of them. Brandon greeted me at the car, slipping a hand around my waist like nothing had changed. "You look incredible," he said, his smile rehearsed and polished. "Exactly like the woman I fell in love with." I smiled back, cool and composed. "And you look like a man who's trying very hard tonight." He chuckled. "Well, it's 20 years. Had to go big." Big, indeed. Inside, the maitre d' led us through the shimmering hallway to the private room. It looked just as I'd imagined. Lavish, opulent, and now crowded with people Brandon hadn't expected. I watched his brow furrow as he scanned the room, saw familiar faces, and did the math he couldn't quite solve. "What's this?" he asked, his voice softening with suspicion. "I thought it would be nice to celebrate with some of the people who've helped build Reynolds & Hart," I said smoothly. "After all, this isn't just our anniversary, it's the company's too." His mouth twitched. "You didn't mention inviting anyone. You didn't mention booking a suite at the Palomar for Maya under your name either." That shut him up. Briefly. But then, like the seasoned showman he was, Brandon recovered. "Let's not ruin a good night," he said, pulling out my chair. "Dinner first, talk later." I sat, crossing my legs and placing my clutch gently on the table. The weight of the USB inside felt like armor. Across the room, Maya entered. She walked in with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. A sleek black dress, perfectly styled hair, and on her wrist, my bracelet. The one I'd admired. The one Brandon had pretended was still a secret. "Surprise," she said, her voice sugary as she approached our table. "Brandon didn't tell me this would be such a big night." I looked her dead in the eye, then at the bracelet. "Stunning," I said, my voice even. "Cartier, right?" Her hand instinctively shifted to hide it. Brandon stood too fast, knocking his napkin to the floor. "Maya was just dropping something off for the Monday presentation." "Sit down, Brandon," I said calmly. My voice didn't rise. I didn't flinch, not even as silence fell over the room, and every head turned toward us. "I believe this is the part," I said, opening my clutch and pulling out the USB, where we stopped pretending. Brandon's eyes locked onto the small black USB drive resting between us like a silent threat. His lips parted, maybe to deny, maybe to stall, but nothing came out. I picked up my champagne glass, letting the light catch the glint of the bracelet on Maya's wrist again. "You know," I said, loud enough for the room to hear, "when I married you, I didn't think I'd need a prenup, but your father insisted, said, and I quote, 'Men make mistakes. Women need insurance.'" A few soft chuckles rippled through the room, nervous, unsure. Brandon's father, who had once patted my head like a well-trained dog, wasn't here to witness the irony, but others were. Investors, colleagues, friends who'd heard the rumors but never dared ask. I leaned in. "Remember that clause, Brandon? The one about infidelity?" His jaw tightened. "Of course you don't," I continued. "You never read the fine print. You were always more interested in headlines than footnotes." Maya took a step back, her face losing color. I glanced at her, then returned to Brandon. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago," I said. "Not just for you and Maya, though the hotel receipts were a nice touch. No," he dug deeper. "Offshore accounts, misappropriated funds, signed approvals for vendor kickbacks you tried to bury. I've got it all." Brandon stood, fingers trembling against the edge of the table. "You're humiliating yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I'm setting myself free." He turned, looking for an escape, but found only watching eyes and unreadable faces. The waiter who had served us for 5 years now stared like he'd walked into a courtroom. The journalist from the Herald adjusted his glasses, already pulling a notepad from his coat pocket. "You don't have to do this here," Brandon said, low and urgent. "You did," I replied. "You just didn't expect I'd be the one writing the ending." He reached for the USB, but I pulled it back. "Not yet," I said. "Let's enjoy dinner first. After all, it's a celebration. 20 years of building something together, until you decided to build something else behind my back." Maya opened her mouth, probably to defend him, but I cut her off with a glance. "You know, Maya," I said lightly, "you remind me of myself. Not the woman I am now, the one I used to be. Smart, eager, hungry for approval. You think wearing my bracelet means you've won, but it's just a symbol, and symbols are cheap." Maya blinked, visibly rattled. "I hope he promised you the world," I added. "He did the same to me. Just know he never built it." I did. I turned to Brandon one last time. "You wanted to replace me in the boardroom, in the bedroom, in the brand, but you forgot one thing." "What's that?" he asked, voice cracking. I smiled. "I'm the foundation, and now I'm pulling it out from under you." The silence after my words wasn't just silence, it was collapse. You could feel it, like the moment before a building caves in. Brandon stood frozen, unsure whether to scream, run, or beg. His world, our world, was beginning to tilt, and he knew it. I straightened my shoulders and finally took my seat, letting the USB rest in full view beside my silverware. The waiter returned with our entrees, his hand slightly shaking as he set down the plates. He didn't make eye contact with Brandon. "Would you like anything else, Mrs. Leighton?" he asked me gently, like he already knew this wasn't a regular anniversary. "No, thank you, Antonio," I said calmly. "This will be just fine." Brandon dropped into his seat across from me, his face pale and blank. For a long moment, he didn't touch his food. His fingers toyed with his napkin, while his eyes darted to the USB over and over again, like it was ticking. "You've been planning this," he said finally, his voice low and bitter. I picked up my fork. "No, Brandon, you planned this, the moment you thought I wouldn't notice, when you decided I was just a supporting character in your narrative." He flinched at that. "You forget," I continued, my voice cool and even, "I built Leighton & Co. with you. While you smiled for cameras and pitched to venture capitalists, I was the one in the spreadsheets until 2 a.m. I was the one fixing your messes before they turned into headlines." Brandon let out a shaky laugh. "You could have just confronted me at home. You didn't have to do this here." I took a slow sip of water. "And let you spin it? No. I wanted witnesses. People who believed in your charm. I needed them to see the truth with their own eyes." Across the room, I saw Richard Cross, our largest investor, staring at us with narrowed eyes. Next to him, Camille Price, our longtime legal counsel, was already typing something into her phone. "Think of what this will do to the company," Brandon hissed. "I have," I said. "And unlike you, I made preparations." His brow furrowed. Remember that lunch meeting I had with Stephanie Weller from Crest Capital? I asked. You assumed I was pitching for investment. I wasn't. She's backing my transition plan. I already registered the new firm name, Aurora Strategy Group. The founding team is assembled. The clients, the real ones, the ones I handled, they're coming with me. He leaned in, desperation crawling into his voice. You're blowing up your life. No, I whispered. I'm detonating yours. I'm freeing mine. Just then, Maya stood up suddenly, her chair scraped back, loud against the polished floor. I didn't sign up for this, she muttered, eyes wide. This is insane. She glanced between us, me calm and composed, Brandon unraveling by the second, before storming toward the exit. The bracelet still glinted on her wrist as she disappeared into the main dining hall. Brandon didn't go after her. He didn't move at all. For the first time in our entire marriage, he was speechless. And I was the one holding the floor. Dessert, Mr. and Mrs. Layton? Antonio asked, reappearing like an actor who missed his cue. Brandon looked at me, like the answer depended on whether there was still anything left to salvage. I met his gaze, tilted my head, and smiled just enough. Yes, I said. Let's finish properly. Antonio returned minutes later with 2 immaculate dessert plates, Brandon's favorite, a molten chocolate cake with sea salt caramel, and mine, lemon tart with bruleed meringue. The presentation was flawless, the way everything had once appeared in our marriage. Brandon stared at his plate like it was poison. He didn't touch it. I, on the other hand, took a bite of mine, tart and sweet, sharp and clean, like clarity. Across the room, I noticed murmurs spreading from table to table. The witnesses I had gathered, colleagues, investors, old friends, even a few media contacts, were connecting dots, whispering to each other. I could feel the shift happening. The weight of Brandon's image, once so perfectly curated, beginning to tilt off its pedestal. You set me up, he muttered. I wiped the corner of my mouth with my napkin. No, Brandon, I gave you every opportunity to choose differently. You're just angry I chose not to be silent. He looked down at the USB drive, then back up at me. You realize if you go through with this, you're not just ending a marriage. You're ending your place in this world, the social circles, the invitations, the power. I laughed softly. That power was never mine, was it? Not truly. I was allowed to stand beside it, not hold it. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Camille Price approached our table. Brandon, she said coolly, we need to talk, privately. Now? He asked, visibly sweating. Yes, now, she said, glancing at me. It seems there are questions about recent offshore transactions and about internal control over company funds. Brandon stood slowly, panic flashing through his eyes. This is ridiculous. Then I'm sure you'll clear it up quickly, Camille replied. Mr. Cross is on the line. He wants to hear directly from you. As she walked away, Brandon turned to me. You've been feeding them. All of them. I didn't respond. He didn't deserve a confirmation, only the truth. He left the table like a man being led into a storm he didn't prepare for. I watched him go, then calmly signaled Antonio. Check, please. He handed it to me with a nod. Though I already knew the total, it didn't matter. The cost of dinner was irrelevant. What I had just served wasn't a meal. It was a reckoning. As I walked out of the restaurant, the room felt different. Lighter. The murmur of gossip didn't follow me. It parted around me like I was untouchable. For the first time in years, I wasn't Brandon Layton's wife. I was simply Celeste. And everyone in that room now knew exactly who I was. Outside, the air was cool. My driver opened the door of the car waiting at the curb. Everything all right, Mrs. Layton? He asked gently. I looked up at the stars flickering through the city haze. Yes, I said. Everything's finally all right. As the door closed behind me, I knew the night wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. The car moved silently through the city, the skyline glowing behind us like a monument to everything I had built and everything I had walked away from. I didn't go back to the penthouse that night. I had no intention of sleeping under that roof ever again. Instead, I checked into a suite at the Montclair, a quiet, elegant hotel with views of the lake. I had booked it weeks in advance under my maiden name, just in case. Every detail of tonight had been orchestrated with precision, but now, in the stillness of the hotel room, the adrenaline drained from my body, leaving something pure behind. Peace. I stood by the window, the lights of the city flickering below me like a living thing. My reflection in the glass stared back, older, wiser, a little tired, but whole. The woman who had walked into the restaurant earlier that evening had carried 20 years of compromise, betrayal, and silence on her shoulders. The woman standing here now had set it all down. My phone buzzed, calls, texts, voicemails from Brandon, from his attorney, from mutual friends who were suddenly concerned for me. I silenced the device and dropped it into the hotel room safe. I wouldn't be needing it. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed the transition documents. The company attorney had sent them an hour ago. The board had voted unanimously. Effective immediately, I was interim CEO of Leighton Strategic Ventures. Camille had delivered the news herself. I was no longer Brandon's supporting act. I was the show. And I had plans. Not revenge. Not anymore. Reclamation. Rebuilding the company under new leadership. Mine. Reestablishing trust with investors, employees, and clients who had grown tired of Brandon's empty charm. Refocusing on integrity, on substance. On everything I had always stood for but had been told to tone down, soften, hide behind a man's shadow. There was a knock at the door. Room service, dinner, untouched. Champagne, unopened. A note attached to the tray, written in Camille's careful handwriting. You didn't just turn the tables, you replaced them entirely. We'll talk in the morning. Sleep well, Madam CEO. I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I didn't need to defend my worth, justify my decisions, or explain how much I'd sacrificed. I simply was. Celeste Whitman. Daughter of Eleanor Whitman, the woman who taught me that silence isn't always golden. Founder of Whitman & Rise, a name that would appear in every business headline by year's end. And survivor of a marriage built on lies, who chose to walk away not with rage, but with power. As I slid into bed, I didn't think about Brandon. I didn't think about the diamond bracelet Jessica had worn, or the lies they told behind my back. I thought about the lake outside, about the clean horizon waiting for me. Tomorrow I would rise. Not from ruins, but from clarity. From this moment on, everything would be mine. 1 week later, the business world was buzzing. Headlines called it the most elegant corporate coup of the decade. Investors described it as a masterstroke of timing and intelligence. Even those who once dismissed me as the quiet partner were now quoting my name in boardrooms and strategy sessions. Brandon, on the other hand, had vanished from the public eye. The board placed him on indefinite leave pending investigation. Our legal team froze his access to all accounts and client portals. Camille had led the HR announcement with poise, explaining the temporary shift in leadership with the kind of grace only a seasoned executive could manage. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't need to. The USB had done the talking. The files it held weren't just receipts, they were a story. A decade of quietly making magic behind closed doors while Brandon smiled for the cameras. Clients called, not with concern, but with congratulations. Several even asked how they could support Whitman & Rise when I made the full transition. And I would. Soon. But first, I needed to finish what I started. I returned to the penthouse only once more, escorted by a security detail hired by the board. Not because I feared Brandon, but because I knew him too well. He wouldn't risk public confrontation, not while the news cycle was still bleeding. But behind closed doors? He was capable of unpredictable cruelty. When I walked in, the place was hollow. The framed awards, the glossy photos, the curated bookshelves, it all felt staged now, like props on a set I no longer belonged to. Brandon appeared from the study, gaunt and furious. You could have just talked to me, he said, voice low and bitter. You didn't have to humiliate me. I set the keys on the entry table. But you didn't just betray our marriage, Brandon. You gambled with our company, with people's jobs, with their futures. I made mistakes, but I built this empire. No, I replied calmly. I was the architect, you were the PR. He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I pulled a sealed envelope from my bag and placed it on the counter. This is the divorce settlement. It honors the prenup, the infidelity clause, and the full transfer of my intellectual property rights back to me. You'll keep your shares, but your voting power will be limited. The board agrees it's best for stability. He laughed, bitter and small. So what am I now, a figurehead? You were always a figurehead, I said gently. The only difference now is that the world knows it. I walked out before he could answer. That night, back in my new apartment, I opened a bottle of wine, not to celebrate Brandon's downfall, but to toast my own resurrection. Camille joined me with files in hand. "These are the final rebranding options," she said. "I think you're gonna like this one." She handed me a mock-up. Whitman and Rise. The logo, a phoenix, rising from a minimalist design of shattered glass. I nodded slowly. "It's not just a company," I said. "It's a message." Camille smiled. "To every woman told to stay quiet, to wait her turn, to smile through betrayal. Yeah, it is." I signed the document. Whitman and Rise would launch the following quarter. And me? I wasn't rebuilding from scratch. I was rising from strategy, from truth, from a story that had always been mine to tell. And now the world was finally listening. 1 year later, the skyline outside Whitney's new office window shimmered with the promise of spring. It had been 12 months since she walked out of her old life with nothing but a clutch, a USB drive, and a plan. Now she sat in the corner suite of Whitman and Rise, her name etched on the glass door, her legacy no longer tethered to someone else's ambition. The company had grown faster than even her boldest forecasts. What started as a small consultancy with 2 junior analysts had blossomed into a full-service strategy firm with Fortune 500 clients lining up for her insight. She'd become a quiet icon in the industry, admired not just for her intelligence, but for the way she'd reclaimed her narrative with grace and steel. Across her desk sat a framed photograph of her grandmother, Eleanor Whitman, the woman who once told her, "Never let a man confuse proximity with power." Whitney had finally understood what she meant, and she'd made sure every young woman she mentored now heard those same words. She glanced at the invitation on her desk, a gala honoring the year's top women in business. Her name was embossed in gold at the top of the list. Beneath it, in small, elegant script, read, "Keynote Speaker." She smiled. There was a time when she would have been seated quietly beside her husband at such an event, expected to clap politely while he accepted awards built on her brilliance. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed, a text from her attorney. "Brandon's settlement is finalized. He's agreed to relinquish all claims to the analytics model and intellectual property. Also, he's left Chicago." No apology, no final attempt at explanation, just quiet retreat, like a man who'd finally realized the spotlight he once basked in had never been his to begin with. Whitney locked her phone and stood, walking toward the balcony. From here she could see the city stretch wide and infinite. She took a deep breath. She had lost a marriage, yes, but she had gained something far more valuable: herself. She was no longer the woman behind the man. She was the woman who rebuilt from ash and wrote her name in stone. Not for revenge, for truth, for legacy, for freedom, and for every woman who'd ever been told to stay silent. Whitney turned back toward her desk, where tomorrow's strategy meeting awaited. She had work to do. And the world was finally listening. This story reminds us that true strength lies not in loud revenge, but in calm, calculated clarity. When you know your worth, no betrayal can truly break you. What did you think of her approach? Let us know in the comments. Type 2 if you liked the story, or 7 if it didn't resonate with you. And if you want more stories like this one, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to EN Reddit Story. Your support means the world and helps us keep sharing tales that speak to the heart.